There's actually probably more poker players than there are golfers.
Fastest growing area of gaming is going to be poker.
Poker is just exploding all over the country now, in fact, all over the world.
It's expanding incredibly.
Every time you turn around, you see more news in the newspaper about a new location for poker.
And I guess I was making about $4 an hour at my job, and every weekend I'd make $300 or $400. So it just seemed like the thing to do to move to Vegas and play poker.
Welcome to Binion's Horseshoe, home of the greatest poker battlefield in history, the World Series of Poker. What brings us to Las Vegas is the incredible thinking and concepts of David Sklansky, as timeless as they are brilliant. Shortly, we'll learn David's key concepts and strategies for winning in Hold'em, 7-card stud, and Omaha high-low split with an 8 qualifier. But for now, we're in the right place at the right time. Binion's and the World Series of Poker, with David in the middle of a seminar. Let's eavesdrop and pick up on some of the highlights.
What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to tell you things that the typical player doesn't know. On the flop in Hold'em, if it's a big pot, and the flop comes down, let's say 2 spades, but it is important to realize what they think you have when you're trying to decide how to play. Well, you know, if you're up against some good players, it's frequently right to just come right out betting. Now, unless these people are keeping track of what day it is, they're going to have problems with you, even the champions. The reason why you played 6-5 of diamonds, when someone says to you, why did you play 6-5 of diamonds? You can say, well, because today was Thursday. And the way you do probability problems, just to make it simple, is you multiply your chances of something happening times your chances of the second thing happening. I'm going to backtrack for 1 minute. Let's take the chances of being dealt 2 aces in Hold'em. How many people here know that? Just out of curiosity. What?
1 out of 72.
That's incorrect.
220.
Okay, I hear a lot of close ones. So about 5 or 6 people here know. It's 1 out of 221, which, if you put it in terms of odds, is 220 to 1. Let me show you how you do that. And this is a very important principle that if you know this principle, then you can work out so many of your own problems. The first card that you're dealt in Hold'em could be an ace. How often? What is the chances that the first card you're looking at is an ace? Simple. 1 out of 13, 4 out of 52 is another way of looking at it. I'm going to say 4 out of 52 just for the time being. Now this is the important part. What is the chances that if your first card is an ace, that your second card will also be an ace? Okay, that's right. It is 3 out of 51. Because if your first card is an ace, then the chances that your second card is an ace would be 3 out of 51. And if you reduce, that becomes 1/13. And this becomes 1/17. Anyway, when you now the point is this: you multiply those 2 fractions. If you know the chances of the first thing happening and you know the chances of the second thing happening after the first thing has happened, you multiply the fractions and the answer becomes 1 over 221. That is the way you do any simple probability problem involving cards. If you're trying to decide your general strategy, how to play in a game, it depends on how good your opponents are. If your opponents are not astute, if they're not perceptive, if they're not trying to figure out what you have, then you do play basic strategy in the same way that there's a blackjack basic strategy. You play certain hands, in certain positions, you call if you get good enough pot odds, you make certain bets and bluffs, etc., according to a simple way that you could probably program a computer, and that computer would do quite well following some basic rules. If your opponents get a bit better, though, now you must play the second level. But you don't play the second level if your opponents are bad. If you try to play the second level against first level opponents, you won't do as well as that guy who just sits there and plays. I've had so many people say to me, you know, I just bought your little Hold'em book. I follow the rules there. I just play. I just won $900. And you know that they don't play that well, but they don't even feel like they have the right to deviate from these simple rules. And there are many games where that is the best way to play, or pretty close to the best way to play. But if they start playing better, now you've got to play a counter strategy. You've got to figure out the best way to fool them, or even double fool them. In other words, you might play your hand differently than the way it would appear in order to fool them. And then if they get even better, you know what? You'll say to yourself, I'm going to play my hand the normal way because they're going to think that I'm fooling them. I mean, like a simple example that comes up all the time in Hold'em, a pair flops on the board. Let's say 2 jacks and a 4. 5 people are in the pot, you got ace-jack. Well, you know, if you're up against some good players, it's frequently right to just come right out betting. You know why? Because good players will say, oh, no, he would never bet a jack there. He's going to check raise. You play against real good players, just come right out betting. You're going to get a pair of 5s, he's going to raise you, and then another guy's got 2 aces, says, oh, I know that he knows that he doesn't have a jack, so I'll re-raise him. You're sitting there with ace-jack. That's happened to me many times. So the point is, if you're up against players who play better, you got to play better. Now, what do you do if you're up against champions? Well, hopefully you'll be in that spot. There's a way of beating them, and it's, but most likely they're going to be trying to outguess you, and they may be better than you are at outguessing them. There's a way called game theory, which basically is, like I say, today you choose diamonds. The reason why you played 6-5 of diamonds, when someone says to you, why did you play 6-5 of diamonds? You can say, well, because today was Thursday. And that's the truth. Yes?
If you're in a situation when you're playing a game and you're losing, would you still use these strategies as opposed to if you were winning?
Losing could mean that maybe the game is tougher than you think, then that would be a reason to quit the game. If losing means that your cards are running badly, everybody here knows, or most people here know, that I don't believe in that cards don't know whether or not you're winning or losing. I read chapters about that. There is something else, though. If you are losing, it is true. There is a reason to change your strategy a little bit, which is that even though you don't believe in it, your opponents believe in it. So if you're losing and that causes them to play against you differently, then that's something that you might have to adjust for. It may even make you want to quit, because sometimes players who normally play badly, let's say not aggressively enough, they see you're losing, they get courage, and they unwittingly start playing better. If you are a winning player, this stop losses, money management, all of that is nonsense. Except if you are losing so much money that you just can't think straight anymore. In general, it's just the more you play, if you're a winning player, the more you'll win. The more you play, if you're a losing player, the more you'll lose. There's 2 reasons you can be a bad player. Basically, you're a bad player because you are too loose, or you're a bad player because you are too meek. And the third way you could be a bad player would be because you are you give away your hand, which is similar to too meek. So either you're too meek, or you're too loose, or hopefully, or you're both, which is, of course, a horrible player. But which type do you mean?
When you say the name David Sklansky, it's interesting the responses you get.
Naturally, David Sklansky is the professor.
He's one of the better card players in the world.
Genius, you know. He's one of my favorite people.
Teacher, lecturer, poker player, professional, intellect, mathematician.
I see him jotting down little notes, and I'm wondering, what is he writing?
Basically, he taught me how to play Hold'em.
David Sklansky is probably the smartest of all the poker players. As unquestionably, his books are the best of all the poker books that was ever written. I mean, the man just knows what he's doing.
There were things in his book that I never even thought of.
He revolutionized the whole thinking of poker and gambling. He is the authority on poker strategy.
I just can't say anything but good about David. For one thing, my granddaughter's a first-year college student. She was failing math early in the semester. He tutored her. Now she's getting an A.
To have a love of poker as he does, and to write about it with as much thought, has been tremendous. I can't think of anybody that has done more for the game of poker than David Sklansky.
David, it's a real pleasure to meet with you and have this opportunity to sit down and talk about your key concepts and general poker strategies. Before we get started, I'd like to share with you some of the questions players have asked me to ask you. But first, as a curious note, and maybe kind of personal, how and when did you get started playing poker? And is poker mostly how David Sklansky makes his living?
Well, still yes, it is. There's been times when I've done nothing but play poker. Now, of course, I'm involved in writing books and consulting, and there have been times when I've been playing mainly blackjack, or playing at least a lot of blackjack, but it's always been at least 50% poker for my source of income ever since about 1970. How it started was I learned poker in high school, like most kids, played 25, 50. After we went to the pool hall, after the pool game, would go home, go to somebody's house and play a little bit of poker. And it used to annoy me that I didn't win as often as I should. I bought some books, read up on it a little bit, and I found myself able to win in these small home games. Then I went to college, University of Pennsylvania, Wharton School. And I have to say that I didn't attend as many classes as I should because I found a poker game. And these kids that I played poker with, they were all excellent players. And guess what? I started losing again. This annoyed me to no end. So I sat down, started thinking about what I might be doing wrong, and tried to study even some more about the game. And I started winning in this college game. And this college game of mine was interesting in that the players would discuss every hand. It wouldn't be like nowadays in casino where no one wants to tell anybody anything. I would be playing in a game, and after every hand we'd discuss it. The money didn't matter as much as the challenge of playing correctly. And there were about 5 or 6 of us guys that all got to be very good players. Now, I leave college, I get a job as an actuary, actuarial trainee. I hated it. I had always had a good aptitude for math, but I was always sort of kind of rebellious, and I couldn't stand the idea of having these people telling me what to do. So while I was supposed to be doing my calculations on this newfangled calculator that they had in those days for the insurance company, instead I was working out poker probabilities. And finally, after a particularly annoying incident at work, I just left, got in my car, and drove to Las Vegas. Said, I want to be a professional poker player. So that's basically how it all started. What happened after that is that I got into some problems for my blackjack play. And now I found myself being thrown out of casinos, even when I was playing poker. What happened next was that I became afraid that I wouldn't be able to play even poker because I couldn't enter the casinos. And that's what made me decide to write my first book, hopefully that would gain some respectability, so to speak.
Now, actually, when you wrote your first book, Hold'em was really a relatively unknown game. How did that come about?
Well, that's a very good point. When I was asked to write a book by the Gamblers Book Club, they suggested high-low split because they knew that was my game, my best game at the time. And in fact, there's still a chapter in Doyle Brunson's major book written by me on high-low split. But when they asked me to write a high-low split book, I turned them down. I said, there's a new game that they're playing now downtown in Las Vegas. It's called Hold'em. Nobody seems to understand how to play this game.
This is 1970?
This is 1976.
76. Okay.
I said, I want to try my hand at writing a book about Hold'em. Interestingly enough, I had only played maybe 100 hours when I sat down to write this book. But writing the book made me think about the game. I thought very hard about it, and I wrote a 60-page book, which is still to this day the biggest seller of all my books. And as I told you yesterday, there was a funny little incident that occurred about a year later when I was still very worried that I wasn't allowed in a lot of casinos when I happened to be up in Reno in the MGM Grand Casino, and I needed a check cashed. And I was playing poker at the time. The card room manager got the casino manager to okay the check, but when he did, he said, "Is David Sklansky in this room right now?" I said to myself, "Oh my God, what did I do? I'm going to get thrown out of the MGM. I let my presence be known to the casino manager." Casino manager comes over to me, he says, "Are you David Sklansky?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, I just want to shake your hand. I've read your book, and I really like it." It was that was the moment that things turned around, and I became known as David Sklansky, author, rather than David Sklansky, persona non grata, as far as the blackjack was concerned. And then, of course, from that point on, it was almost all poker.
David, that's fascinating. Those are great stories. Now on to the questions. You've said money management is a fallacious concept, yet there are scores of examples of players going broke because they didn't properly manage the money they had. How can these two things jibe?
This is a very important question you're asking me, because people get confused between two concepts. One is what is normally called money management, and one is what I would call bankroll management. Bankroll management is very important. Even if you are a great player, you must have enough of a bankroll to sustain the inevitable losing streaks. And I have never been opposed to that. Quite the contrary. I and my partner Mason have been very vociferous proponents of keeping a big enough bankroll to be able to play and sustain losses. The concept that I am always trying to explain to people is the other definition of money management. Money management in most people's minds means quitting simply because of how you are doing that day, or continuing to play because of how you are doing that day. In other words, you're in a game and you've lost X number of bets, so you quit, only to come back tomorrow. Well, that is a silly concept because it is all one game. If you are a serious poker player, you are playing by the week, by the month, not by the day. And if you, for instance, are in a very good poker game, you don't quit simply because of how you are doing. You quit because the game has gotten worse. You quit because you are tired. You quit because you don't want to win too much and have them not invite you back to the game. These are all proper reasons, but not because I'm going badly, I'm getting bad cards that day, or because I've lost a certain amount, or because I've won a certain amount. That is simply incorrect. This isn't my opinion. This is just simply incorrect. If you play in a game where you have an advantage, the longer you play, the more you will eventually win. If you play in a game where you have a disadvantage, the longer you play, the more you'll eventually lose. There's no way of getting around that. If there was such a thing as getting around having a disadvantage simply by money management, you could go to the crap table and win. By money management. In other words, by quitting at the right time or not quitting at the right time. But you cannot do that. Money management is a completely spurious idea as far as when you quit or when you don't quit. The only thing that matters when you are gambling is to gamble where the odds are in your favor, where you are the best player, where you figure to win. And when you are in that situation, play as long as you can. When you are not in that situation, quit at the first opportunity. That's really all there is to say. Bankroll management, as far as having enough money, that's different. But money management, no.
Another question that came up a lot was playing in wild hold'em games, where most pots are raised and re-raised, oftentimes cat before the flop. How do you play big cards? Hands like ace-king suited, ace-queen, when they don't hit the flop. What's the proper criteria for chasing with these kinds of hands? Or do you chase?
Well, you chase, certainly, if the pot odds warrant it. That will be explained later in more detail. But to answer your question about big cards are really not such a great hand unless they are suited in games that you speak of. Because when you are in a game where people are playing wildly, invariably somebody makes a good hand. And if your big cards are being played normally only in hopes of making a big pair. Well, a big pair is a good hand in most games, but a big pair is not such a good hand in wild games. So if you have an unsuited hand, even if they're two big cards, you should be cautious with them. If they are suited, it's a totally different story because of the extra possibility of making a flush, which can totally swing all of the odds, etc. As far as whether you chase with that hand after the flop, I will say this. If on the flop there is a lot of money in the pot and you find yourself with even as little as a 3-card flush, that may very well be enough of an extra reason to chase. If on the flop you find yourself, though, with only 2 big cards, normally I would say no. Of course, there's plenty of exceptions to anything I say. It depends exactly on the situation. But normally, if you have, for instance, ace-king, and the flop comes a jack, a 9, and a 7, normally, in these wild games, you don't continue with it just in the hopes of catching an ace. Why? Because that might not win even if you do.
David, what about raising too much? Seems in your basic everyday limit games you find at most card rooms. Each table has a player or two who seems to be constantly raising. Do they do this because they've discovered it's the way to win, or do they know something most of us average players don't fully understand?
Well, they have discovered the way to win. Whether they do it simply because they happen to hit upon it or because they know something, I don't know. But the fact is, raising is the way to win. There are many players who have just hit upon it without understanding the underlying theory. And then there are those who understand the theory, but the fact is, raising is the way to win. Those players who don't raise a lot will not win in almost all games. Raising is an extremely important weapon that must be used much more often than the typical player realizes.
Even in the smaller limit games?
Even in smaller limit games, raising. Now that doesn't mean that you play a lot of hands. That simply means that those hands that you have chosen to play, you should frequently raise with. But the fact is, when you raise, you can knock people out, you can get them to check to you on the next card, and you simply get more money in the pot when you have the best hand. Calling is not something that should be your last alternative. There are times when calling is the right thing to do, but never miss an opportunity to at least consider raising. Always consider raising. Yes, these people who raise and who win, that's why they win, because they raise.
David, a quick question, but I'd like your opinion. Is playing good the same as playing tight?
That's a very good question, and it depends a little bit on the game. The fact is that most winning players, and therefore good players, do tend to play tight. Whether or not the two things are synonymous depends somewhat on the game. There are some games where the main thrust of your edge comes from playing tight. There are other games where that is only one of many aspects to the game. For instance, Omaha, 8 or better high-low split, playing tight is the most important thing. If you don't play tight, you won't win. If you do play tight, you will probably win even if you don't play all that great. In a game like 7-card stud, playing tight is only one of the many parts to that game. So that's the best way I can answer it. Sometimes playing tight has a lot to do with playing good. In other games, maybe not. It also has to do with the size of the ante. The bigger the ante in comparison to the stakes, the less important it is to play tight. In fact, if the ante is big enough, it becomes downright wrong to play tight. Playing tight simply means on your first round of betting to throw away most of your hands. That's only one aspect to being a winning player. All winning players throw away bad hands, that's for sure. But there are plenty of losing players who throw away bad hands too. just playing tight in most games is not enough to win.
David, what do the good players do to keep their game in top form, and how do players get to be good?
Well, I think there's two different ways. One way is by having a talent for it. And the fact is there are players who just seem to have great talent for games or for cards. And in fact, that particular method was the prevalent method up until about 10 or 15 years ago, where the people who were playing cards for a living, winning, came from pool hustling, came from the other side of the track, so to speak. But lately, it has been discovered that the more studious type of person who doesn't have great talent necessarily for cards, but is willing to study, to learn, whether it be books, videotapes, or just thinking. And the fact is that poker is not a game of just instinct. It's fine if you have that instinct, fine if you have that talent, but if you're willing to put in the time to study, to think, to notice when you're playing, to notice everything, you can become excellent at the game by putting in the time and by putting in the work.
Now, one last question before we get started. Some players become upset when they get a hand or a succession of hands drawn out on and start playing badly. And yet others seem to be able to just shrug it off without their play deteriorating or worse, going on tilt. What is the key to keeping your game at its best when everything seems to be going at its worst?
Well, I think there's two keys to that. I can tell you what I do. These are basically psychological tricks that you can play on yourself, because nobody is happy when they're losing. The fact is that if you get into a game, and let's say a 10-20 game, and after the first hour you find yourself down $700, you know that it is very unlikely that you can get that $700 back that day, especially if you play properly, which means to throw most of your hands away. So, of course, many people start playing bad hands in order to try to get that $700 back. This is silly and wrong. The correct thing to do is just to play as well as you can, hope to get $300 of the $700 back, and once in a while you will get the whole $700 back. Well, how does one do that? And the answer that I've found is you have to sort of trick yourself. You have to just say, it doesn't matter whether I win or lose. It only matters that I play well. And the way you can get yourself to do that is, one, by having pride in yourself. I'm not here to win, I'm here to play well. Be proud of the way I'm playing. Be able to go home and say, you know, I lost $500 today, and a bad player would have lost $900 with those same cards. You have to realize that a day that you lose can make you money at the end of the month just as much as the day that you win, because if you lose $500 and a bad player would have lost $900, then that means that's $400 more profit at the end of the month. That's one trick. And the other trick is to just simply realize that you figure to win a certain amount per hour in the long run. You are coming to work, you are not gambling, and you are just constantly playing your best in the hopes that, or in the certainty actually, that you will eventually win what you are expected to win. And you don't think about any individual result, you don't think about any individual day, and in fact, you don't even have to count your money while you're playing or even after you're playing. This is not a football game. If you're a serious poker player, it doesn't matter what the score is at the end of the day. In football, there's no difference between a 30-0 loss and a 30-28 loss. But in poker, there is, because the score continues on to the next day. I'd much rather lose 30-28 than 30-0 in poker.
Thank you very much. Now, let's get started. First, David covers key poker concepts in general, followed by concepts and strategies in Hold'em, 7-card stud, and Omaha high-low split with an 8 qualifier. In closing, David touches on play in extremely loose and wild games, plus a few words on the subject of bluffing.
General poker concept key point number 1. Always consider the size of the pot.
When players ask me how they should have played a particular hand at a particular point, it constantly amazes me when they neglect to tell me how much money is in the pot. They apparently don't understand that this information can be crucial when determining the best play. Most players seem to think pot odds only matter when trying to decide whether to call with a hand that needs to improve to win. Nothing could be further from the truth. All your decisions are affected by pot size as compared to bet size. For instance, the larger the pot, the more likely you should bet rather than check. Similarly, the bigger the pot, the more likely the proper play would swing from calling to raising, or even from folding to raising. Check-raising decisions are also affected by the amount of money in the pot. Remember that your opponents are considering their pot odds when they are trying to decide whether to call you. Obviously, this means you must be thinking about pot size before making any decision about how to beat them.
Key point concept number 2. Open more hands than you'll call with.
This concept is extremely important for all but the loosest of games. It applies to virtually any form of poker, yet only expert players understand the importance. The fact is that mediocre hands have a much better chance of winning if they are opening the pot rather than if they are calling someone else who has already opened. Why? 2 reasons. First, there is always the chance that if you open the pot, you will steal the antes without a fight. This is, of course, impossible if someone else has already opened. Secondly, it is reasonably likely that your mediocre hand is the best hand if no one else has opened, but highly unlikely if they have. Interestingly, this idea is well known in the game of jacks or better draw poker, where most players know that it is frequently okay to open with a pair of jacks, but not okay to call with them. Less well known is the fact that this general strategy applies to all poker games. As an example, we'll use Hold'em. Suppose you are in a fairly late position with a queen-jack offsuit. If no one else has yet entered the pot, the proper play is to raise. However, if somebody else has already raised or even called, you should fold that same queen-jack.
Key point number 3. Read thoughts as well as hands.
Unless you are playing complete nitwits who are just paying attention to their own hands, you should not decide on your best play without first taking into account what you suspect is in your opponent's mind. What hand does he put you on? What does he think you are putting him on? For instance, most opponents would be more likely to bluff if they suspect you are weak or if they think you think they are strong. They'll be more likely to call your bet if they think you are weak or if they think you think they are weak. The real expert knows that the decision as to whether to call, bluff, bet a marginal hand for value, or even raise or check raise can depend as much upon his assessments of his opponent's thoughts as his assessment of his opponent's hand. Against a good player, always keep in mind your earlier actions as well as his. Those of you with talent and experience will realize that if you do this, you will usually be able to figure out his thoughts.
General poker concept 4. Remember, your opponent can also improve.
Just because you know there is a fairly good chance that you have your opponent beaten early in a hand does not mean you should call his bet. You can't stop more cards from coming. And if your hand has little chance to improve significantly, you may very well be in an untenable situation. Namely one where your only hope is that you have the best hand now and that it stands up. Not taking into account the possibility your opponent can draw out on you, as well as have you beat already, will have you playing many hands you should throw away. For instance, if your hand has a 30% chance of being best now, but there is a 1/3 chance he will improve his losing hand to a winning hand, your actual chances of winning the pot is 20%. For example, suppose you are playing 7-card stud and an ace raises the pot with what you suspect is either a pair of aces or a 3-card flush. You call with 2 queens. Now on 4th Street, he catches a suited card to his ace and you don't improve. If he bets again, you should fold. While it is true that you would call him if you knew he had only a 4 flush, the combined chances that he already has 2 aces, plus the chances that he makes his flush if he has a 4 flush, forces you to throw your hand away.
General Poker Concept key point number 5. Learn all games. Learn not to have an ego.
If you are seriously counting on poker as a means to making money, the above concept may be the most important of all, because it is a sad but true fact that a pretty good player will win more from bad players than a great player will win from decent ones. And since you are usually playing in a casino or a card room setting, there will occasionally be bad players to be found at all but the highest games. It matters not whether you are the best player at the table. If there is someone throwing their money away, you'll get your share. However, you do have to play reasonably well. This means that in order to never miss opportunities to play against the so-called live ones, you should learn how to play all the different available games. I don't know how many times I have watched 8 7-card stud specialists all playing against each other while there was a drunk or a bad loose player playing hold'em at the next table. Make sure you don't make their mistake.
Next in General Poker Concepts, these are the main things to beware of. Beware of drawing dead.
This is a fairly well-known idea, but it doesn't hurt to reiterate it. Drawing dead means drawing to a hand that isn't good enough to win even if you make it. While no one would knowingly do this, many will take a chance of drawing dead when they shouldn't. For example, if you have a 25% chance to make your flush, but you think there is a 40% chance you are drawing dead, your chances of winning drop to 15%. The pot would have to be a lot bigger to justify your playing in these cases than when you know you are drawing live.
Beware of players yet to act behind you.
One of the biggest mistakes most poker players make is to consider only those players who have already bet or called or raised when they make their decision. Players behind them are largely ignored, especially on the first round of betting, where they have yet to show their strength. Just because those players' holdings are at this point random doesn't mean they can't be good. And the more players yet to act, the more likely one of them will have you in trouble. The most obvious way this concept affects your strategy is this. If there is a bet to your right, you should throw away many of the hands when there are players behind you that would have been worth a call if they weren't behind you. Not making this adjustment can turn you from a winner into a loser. As an example, let's say you're playing 7-card stud. You have a 10 showing and a 10 and an 8 in the hole. Behind you, yet to act, is a jack, a queen, and a king. There are no other jacks, queens, or kings showing. Now to your right, a player with a 9 raises. You suspect he has 2 9s. However, even though you have him beaten with your 2 10s, you must fold. Those 3 cards behind you are too dangerous.
Beware of the effects of underestimating short-term luck.
Almost all gamblers suffer from a common malady. They overestimate the effect of luck in the long run and underestimate luck in the short run. While anybody who is losing after 500 hours of playing is probably kidding themselves when they blame their bad cards, because it's much more likely they are not playing well enough to win, on the other hand, even the best players have occasional losing streaks overall. I expect to lose about 1 out of every 3 sessions. Now, I've heard it said that the successful person should have enough confidence so that he assumes he'll win every time he plays. But that is silly. What he should assume is that he will play his best every time he plays. However, even perfect play will only result in a win rate of about 70% in all but the easiest games. There are 2 specific dangers associated with overestimating your chances of winning in a particular session. For one, you are more likely to go on tilt, and you are more likely to play without an adequate bankroll. Going on tilt means playing badly when losing in a desperate attempt to get even. You won't do this if you accept losing as part of the game. As for bankroll, if you don't have 300 big bets, you don't have enough.
Before we move to Hold'em, let's summarize Sklansky's General Poker Concepts. Always consider the size of the pot. Open more hands than you'll call with. Read thoughts as well as hands. Remember, your opponent can also improve. Learn all games. Don't let your ego keep you from getting in games that can get you the money. Beware of drawing dead. Beware of players yet to act behind you. Beware of underestimating the effects of short-term luck. Next, let's move to Hold'em. David Sklansky's Hold'em concept key point number 1. Adjust starting hand requirements based on your position.
As much as the importance of position has been emphasized by all Hold'em experts, it still hasn't been emphasized enough. The fact is that the rules of Hold'em put tremendous pressure on you when you are in early position. Not only do you have to worry about better hands behind you that have yet to act, you also have to act first on the next 3 rounds of betting. This means that in early position you need a very high-quality hand to play, with the exception of the occasional deceptive type hand like 6-5 suited. Many players do play almost as tight as they should in early position, but few of them fully understand the other side of the coin. Tight, good players invariably don't play loose enough in late position, especially if there are already players in the pot. The fact is, if you are on the button or next to the button, it is wrong to throw away hands even as mediocre as Queen 8 suited or Jack 10 offsuit, especially if your opponents don't play that well. While you shouldn't go overboard, please understand you are costing yourself money if you don't play considerably more hands when you are in late position.
Hold'em key point number 2. Pay attention to which players are in the blinds.
This is another concept that only experts know. Merely good players, for the most part, frequently don't extract all they could have out of a game because they don't adjust their play before the flop based on what kind of players are in the blinds. For example, if the blinds are very tight players, you should raise with far more hands in late position if no one else has already entered the pot, since there is a good chance that you will win it right there. If they are loose players in the blind, you should fold some of those very same hands. For example, against loose players, you should fold hands like 2 deuces, Queen 9 offsuit, or Ace 8 offsuit, and just call with hands like 2 sevens or a Jack 10 suited. All hands with which you would have raised had there been tight players in the blind. But against loose players, raise only with premium hands. Even more important than how tight the blinds play is how good they play. Yet only the best players realize this. They know that when even one of the blinds plays badly, they can play many more hands in any position. This is because they can often profit later on in the hand in some way from that weak opponent in the pot. Conversely, you should usually tighten up when the blinds are both very good players. Keep in mind there is a huge difference between a player who plays well and a player who plays tight.
Key point 3. Consider extra outs.
In Hold'em, extra outs basically means a draw to a backdoor hand different from the one that you are going for on the flop. This typically occurs when you flop not only a pair but also a 3-card straight or flush. It may seem that the approximately 4% chance of hitting this backdoor hand is insignificant, but this may not be so at all. In Hold'em, it is quite common that you are getting 8 or 9 to 1 odds on the flop. If you have only a small pair, you are about a 10 to 1 underdog, which isn't enough to play. However, if you also have a backdoor draw, which is over 20 to 1 by itself, the 2 chances combined makes you less than a 7 to 1 shot. This is easily seen if you change your odds to percentages. 10 to 1 is about 9%, which added to your other 4% chance makes you 13%, which is about 6 3/4 to 1. The point to understand is that in these large pot situations, your extra outs don't increase your chances by 4%, but rather by about 50% from what they otherwise were. This can easily make the difference between folding and calling.
Hold'em concept key point number 4. Adjust strategy based on number of opponents.
Everyone knows that good players will change their strategy according to which players are playing against them. Less well known is the fact that they should adjust based on how many players are playing against them. The fact is, many Hold'em hands do better in the long run against many opponents, while others do better against 1 or 2 opponents. As obvious examples, 10-9 suited is best multi-way, whereas Ace-Queen offsuit is just the opposite. In general, both before the flop and on the flop with a drawing hand, you want many players. With pairs and high cards, you want few players. Some ways this concept affects your strategy are: number 1, Don't play marginal head-up preferring hands like King-Jack offsuit when the pot is multi-way. Number 2, don't play marginal multi-way preferring hands like 8-7 suited when the pot is short-handed. Number 3, do play hands like 5-4 suited when you can get in cheaply in late position in a multi-way pot. The same goes for hands like King-Little suited or maybe even Queen-Little suited. Number 4, try to thin out the field at all costs when you have a good hand that prefers few opponents. Typically, this means raising or check raising, not just betting.
Hold'em key point 5, bet some weak hands early, check some strong hands later.
It is very important when playing Hold'em against tough competition that you play somewhat deceptively, especially when you are in an early position. If you almost always bet your good hands and check your bad ones, you are making things very easy for your opponents. They will simply bet when you check and fold most of their hands when you bet. To get out of this dilemma, there are a few things you should do. Number 1, bet most pairs on the flop, even bottom pair, especially if you have something to go with it like a high kicker or a 3-flush. Also bet most of your pocket pairs unless 3 overcards flop. Number 2, check top pair on the flop if it looks like you can get in a check raise that will thin out the field. Number 3, when you do bet a good hand on the flop, consider checking on 4th Street, thus representing one of the weaker hands that they now know you'll bet on the flop. If they bet after you check, you should usually raise. For instance, suppose you have 10-9 suited and the flop comes Ace-10-5, 3 different suits. You should usually come right out betting. As a second example, if you have an Ace-King and the flop is King-8-3, you should sometimes bet, but when you do bet and get called, you should frequently go for a check raise on 4th Street.
According to David, there are 3 main things in Hold'em to beware of. Number 1, beware of one lone ace.
Though most experienced Hold'em players are aware of this concept, new players, even those who are experienced in other games, may not be. Though it may seem like common sense that any ace, even when accompanied by a small card, is an above-average hand, in reality it usually isn't. This is because of the 3 subsequent rounds of betting. If you were all in with your ace before the flop, you would win your share of hands and it would be worth playing. But with betting, you have 2 problems. First, you may have to throw a hand away that would have won had you stayed until the end. Secondly, when you do pair your ace, you may just lose more money when someone else has a higher kicker. The good players know that the only time to play an ace with a card below a 10 is if you have a good chance to steal the blinds or if you are suited and you expect a multi-way pot.
In Hold'em, beware of just calling.
Just because I say you should bet most of your pairs doesn't mean you should call with them. If someone else bets, the pot has to be much bigger for a call to be right with middle or bottom pair than for a bet to be right. Furthermore, if your hand is worth a call, it is frequently better to raise, especially on the flop. There are all kinds of reasons for this, such as image, getting a free card, winning the pot right there, as well as others. So stay away from calling as much as possible, especially early in the hand. If you can't raise, you should probably fold.
Another key point to beware of, fearing flops containing a pair.
When the flop contains a pair, it is much less likely that someone has a decent hand. This should be common sense because now there are only 5 cards left in the deck that matches one of the cards on the board, as opposed to the 9 cards that match a non-paired flop. When you add this to the fact that most players will usually check the first betting round when they flop 3 of a kind, it shows that you frequently have little to fear when someone bets into a paired flop. Thus, if you have 2 pairs or a straight or a flush draw, it is rarely correct to fold. Just as important is the fact that a flop with a pair can present a very good bluffing opportunity, especially against players who are unaware of the above concept. The best opportunities occur when the pair is small and there is no possible straight or flush draw. How to play when a pair flops is a very complex question, but you are well on your way to answering this question if you almost welcome rather than fear such a flop, even when it doesn't hit you.
Let's quickly summarize David's key Hold'em concepts. Adjust starting hand requirements based on your position. Pay attention to which players are in the blinds. Consider extra outs. Adjust strategy based on number of opponents. Bet some weak hands early, check some strong hands later. In Hold'em, David points out 3 things to beware of. Beware of one lone ace. Beware of just calling. And beware of fearing flops that contain a pair.
We'll have more with David on 7-Card Stud and Omaha in a moment. But right now, let's hear from some world-class players as they talk about their approach to the game.
It's a whole lifestyle. It involves developing your character, it involves discipline. Like we often say, it's a long year. And so you have to keep yourself in top mental and physical and emotional shape. And I think that's what it takes. As I was discussing just recently with an associate of mine, it's not pretty the way I do it. I'm very much in a rhythm, in a tempo that suits my personality, and it's I put one foot in front of the other, and I'm very steady. I'm known for being consistent and steady. I'm not a highly creative or artistic poker player. I'm more of a blue-collar worker. And I know it's inevitable that I'm going to lose about a third of the time. In other words, if I play 300 days a year, I'm going to lose 100 days a year. And that's just inevitable. It's just like a professional baseball player. If he's a great one, knows he's only going to get a hit a third of the time. Well, I get a hit about 2/3 of the time in my business.
I've got a lot of patience. And when I'm stuck, I have a lot of patience. Mostly I play my players, you know. I watch them real carefully, and I know how they play. And I can sort of tell when their mind shifts from, you know, from playing good to getting kind of upset and starting to play bad. And I attack.
One thing I've learned over the many years is that there's great similarities between a high-stakes poker game or a high-stakes poker tournament and the business world. That the business world is really a business of people, not corporations or legal entities as such, but people. It's just like a card game is not really a game of cards. It's a game of understanding people and understanding your opponents in the various games. The less sophisticated players don't tend to vary their game at all. They play the same way all the time. So a more expert player, particularly a professional player, can pretty much understand how they play all the time. So they're very predictable. A good professional player is not predictable. Their game changes, their attitudes change, and their game's playing style is always camouflaged from their opposition, whereas the lesser sophisticated players play the same way all the time. And that's a big difference when you get ready to add up the chips at the end of the day.
Interesting comments. Now let's get back to concepts and strategies with David. Next subject, 7-Card Stud.
David Sklansky's 7-Card Stud key point number 1. Adjust starting requirement to cards that are out.
All stud players know it is better to have live starting hands, but few know how important it really is. Whether you have high cards, pairs, a 3-card flush, or a 3-card straight, be aware that your hand has become significantly worse and frequently unplayable if some of your needed cards are showing. In the case of flush and straight draws, you should also be paying close attention to how many of your potential pair cards are gone, as well as your flush and straight cards. In a close decision, the liveness of those cards can make the difference. Conversely, be aware that seemingly mediocre hands can become quite playable if absolutely all of your useful cards are alive. Knowing this will allow you to play a lot more hands than might be expected, especially in large ante games. A hand like 10-8-7, for example, should be far from an automatic fold. One other hint. Be more inclined to play if you have seen no cards of the same suit of your up card. You will often be able to steal the pot later on when you show a 3-flush. For example, in this case, you would usually throw your hand away, even though you have 3 spades. Not only are there 2 spades showing, but there is also a 6 and a 3 that could pair you. In this second case, you would almost always play, even though this hand on the surface doesn't appear all that good. However, there are no jacks, 9s, or 8s out. There are also no 10s, queens, or 7s. Finally, there are no spades. Given all that, your hand is actually quite strong. What we have here for this third example is an unusual hand that can be worth playing especially against tough opponents. Though your hand is weak and one of your jacks is showing, you can turn this to your advantage because now most players will assume that you probably started with 3 hearts. This means that if you catch 2 more hearts, you may very well be able to steal the pot.
7-card stud, key point number 2. Starting pairs are much better with high kickers or 2-card straight flushes.
When you are dealt a small or medium pair, it is frequently a borderline decision as to whether to play the hand. Therefore, a small extra edge can easily make the difference. It can turn a hand that you would have otherwise folded into one with which you will now call or even raise or even re-raise. A live ace kicker is often the deciding factor. A high kicker, higher than the opponent's probable pair, is almost as good. The reason, of course, is that if you hit your kicker, you will probably win even if he also makes 2 pair. If you have a 2-card straight flush with your pair and your cards are live, this can also swing your decision. This is especially true in a big ante game or in a multi-way pot. The backdoor straight or flush will come only about 4% of the time, but this is enough to change a 7-to-1 shot to a 5-to-1 shot. Keep this fact in mind. Obviously, in this first example, you would rather have 2 5s with an ace rather than 2 5s with a 10. And you would probably play those 2 5s with an ace and fold the 2 5s with a 10. In the second example, you'd rather have a smaller kicker if that smaller kicker has given you a 2-card straight flush, because a 2-card straight flush is more important to have than only a moderately high kicker.
Key point concept number 3. Understand how multi-way pots affect your hand.
I mentioned a similar concept in Hold'em. It is just as important for 7-card stud. The underlying mathematical principle is that a good but not great hand with little chance of major improvement does not welcome many opponents in spite of the higher pot odds. This affects proper stud strategy considerably. For instance, if you have 1 high pair, you should try to do whatever is necessary to thin out the field. And if you see you can't, then you should avoid pushing the hand against a large number of opponents. In fact, if your cards aren't live, you might even throw it away. These ideas should be used on the first 3 rounds of betting especially. Knowing these concepts will allow you to play some hands that others might not when you have a good drawing hand, but it will force you to throw away these same hands when it appears you'll be head up.
7 stud key point 4, play your board, yet be sure to respect his.
Since 4/7 of a player's final hand is face up for all to see in 7-card stud, you usually have a fairly good idea of what a player has. While expert card reading will occasionally allow you to deduce that an opponent's hand is a lot worse than what his up cards threaten, it is very dangerous to act on that thought unless you are very sure of yourself. For instance, I rarely bet into a 3-card flush showing on 5th Street. I check even if I'm almost sure he doesn't have a flush. There are 2 reasons. For one, I know he can still make a flush, and 2, I expect he will bet his hand even if he doesn't have a flush. Remember, a strong board can always turn into a strong hand even if by accident. When you have a strong board, you should recognize the effect it has on your opponent and behave accordingly. That means that you bet a hand that you might not otherwise. A weak hand now has a chance to steal. Conversely, a strong hand that you had planned to sandbag must now also be bet if your up cards unfortunately show strength. Of course, if your board is weak, the strategy is reverse.
7 stud key point number 5, 4th Street is for raising, 5th Street folding, 6th Street calling.
Of course, this is an oversimplification, but it is a good guideline that should not be strayed from too often. First, realize that once you have decided to play a hand on 3rd Street, it is rarely correct to fold on 4th Street. And good poker dictates that if a call is right, a raise is often better. This is especially true on 4th Street and stud if you have any kind of threatening board. There are numerous advantages to this play regardless of the strength of your hand. On 5th Street, however, the bet size doubles and hands are developing. Now is the time to get out if your chances look poor. You can't evaluate your pot odds without taking into account future bets you may have to put in the pot. 6th Street is a different story. There is now usually too much money in the pot to make a fold correct with anything but practically hopeless hands. The same is true for 7th Street, although an expert player may have the judgment that will allow him to save a bet here and there. In this first example, you can assume that your opponent has a pair of queens or better. Still, with a 4 flush and an overcard, your hand is at least as good as his, and you should raise. In this second case, where you and he have those same up cards, and he once again probably has 2 queens, you should still raise, even though your hand is now worse than his. The play is right for many reasons, not the least of which is you can expect him to check to you on the next card. Here's a case where it's time to throw away your pair of 9s. With normal betting, you can expect that your opponent has at least a pair of 10s and has a good chance of having or making aces up. It's simply not worth chasing. Now, in this last example, you have that same pair of 9s, and your opponent, again, could have aces up or make aces up. But since he didn't catch his ace until the 6th card, the pot has gotten too large to get away from. Thus, you are forced to call.
According to David, in 7-card stud, beware of the following. Beware of dead pairs, even big ones.
Any pair, except for maybe 2 aces, is very vulnerable when a lot of your improvement cards are already gone. In fact, you should usually throw away pairs as high as kings if both your 3 of a kind cards are gone, or even if only one of them is showing and 2 of your kickers are gone as well. Believe it or not, this is true even when you are quite sure you have the best hand at this point. You probably won't when all the cards are out, and you won't win very much even when you do win with them. Of course, these folds are made on 3rd Street, where there is little money in the pot, and there are a couple of exceptions. You can play these dead pairs if you're against only one player who clearly has a worse hand than yours. Likewise, these hands are worth a raise if you have a good chance to steal the ante. But if you aren't in one of those above 2 situations, you should almost always throw your hand away. Having the knowledge and the willpower to do this will save you a lot of money.
Beware of low straight draws, even if your cards are live.
I have been spending so much time telling you that your weaker hands are not too bad if your cards are live and that your drawing hands are quite good against many opponents that I realize I might have misled you about one particular hand. Small 3-card straights can never be that good and should be played cautiously and frequently not at all. The fact that all your pair and straight cards are live doesn't help you that much against one player, since you are getting lousy pot odds on your straight, and your pair, if you can make it, will almost certainly be too small. On the other hand, your 4, 5, 6 is no better off in a multi-way pot. Your pot odds increase, but so does the chance that you will make your hand and still lose. Those small straight draws with live cards can be played if it's not too expensive. You have to be ready to get rid of them quickly, even when you help your hand. If you never play them at all, I won't object.
Beware of automatic 7th Street play.
When there are no more cards to come, many of the concepts that apply to all the other earlier betting rounds no longer hold true. The main reason is you are no longer worried about giving free cards or forcing them to pay to outdraw you. A bet is thus normally not right anymore just because you are favored to have the best hand. You usually have to be favored even if you are called. This is just one example where your strategy changes. The mistake of playing too automatically on the river can best be examined by taking the case where one player has an obvious pair of aces against a player with an obvious pair of kings. On the last card, the aces typically bets if he improves and checks if he doesn't. The kings, if checked too, will always bet if he improves and sometimes bluffs if he doesn't. A little thought will show that it is better for the aces to sometimes check raise when he improves, as well as sometimes when he doesn't. He should also frequently come out betting without improving. It all depends on the player he is up against. 7th Street, just like any other street, provides the expert player with opportunities for creativity. Don't go overboard, but do take that opportunity once in a while.
Next, we'll visit with David on Omaha High-Low 8 or better. But first, let's briefly review the Sklansky 7-card stud key concepts. Adjust starting requirements to cards that are out. Starting pairs are much better with high kickers or 2-card straight flushes. Understand how multi-way pots affect your hand. Play your board, but respect his board. And key point number 5 in 7-card stud, 4th Street is for raising, 5th Street for folding, and 6th Street is for calling. As David points out, 7-card stud, 3 main points to beware of are: beware of dead pairs, even big ones. Beware of low straight draws, even if your cards are live. Beware of automatic 7th Street play. Next, David Sklansky's key concepts in Omaha High-Low Split with an 8 qualifier. Key concept number 1, play mainly hands where all 4 cards work with each other.
When you have 4 cards in your hand, how many different 2-card hands are you holding? If there is not a pair in your hand, the answer is 6. Think about it. When you have a pair, you can still have as many as 4 different hands. Now, it should be obvious that you would have the edge on your opponent if you were allowed to play more hands at one time, even if his lesser number of hands were somewhat better. Well, this is the case when he plays a hand like King-King 8-8 or King-Queen 3-Deuce. In both cases, he is basically only playing 2 hands, since King-8, King-3, and King-Deuce are not likely to help win the pot. Contrast this to a hand like Ace-3, 4-6, where the Ace-6 is suited. Any one of the holdings, Ace-3, Ace-4, Ace-6, 3-4, 3-6, or 4-6 might make the difference in the hand. On the high side, you want a hand like King-Queen Jack-10, preferably double-suited, or Queen-Queen Jack-9, etc. A high pair that isn't double-suited or that doesn't have Ace-Deuce or Ace-3 to go along with it should be usually thrown away. In general, if you have a wasted card in your hand, the rest of your hand has to be very strong to make it worth playing.
Key point number 2, don't automatically play Ace-Deuce or Ace-Ace.
There are absolutely no unsuited 2-card hands that should be automatically played in this game. If it is expensive to see the flop, you have some tough opponents, and your position is not good, you should throw away even Ace-Deuce or Ace-Ace if you have little to go with them. Ace-Deuce 9-7 or Ace-Ace Jack-8 with no ace-high flush draw are examples. The reason for this was explained in key point number 1. There are some hands that should be played almost no matter what. They are Ace-Deuce 3 anything, Ace-Deuce anything anything where the ace is suited, and Ace-Ace Deuce anything. Also Ace-Ace 3 anything where the ace is suited, and Ace-Ace 3-4. There are some other hands in this category as well, but I'm sure you get the general idea. Hands that are almost always playable include Ace-3 anything anything where the ace is suited, Ace-Deuce anything anything, Ace-Ace anything anything, King-King Ace-4, King-King Queen-Jack, Queen-Jack 10-9, etc. Realize that 2-3-4 can be a lot better than 2-3 because it provides so-called counterfeit protection, but beware of playing it when an ace doesn't flop.
Omaha High-Low Split 8 or better key point concept 3, adjust for position and bet size.
The rules for Omaha work just like Hold'em. If you are first, you stay first. That means just like Hold'em, you have to have a much better hand to come in early than late. Keep in mind both parts of this statement. If you are presently a solid Omaha player, you are probably not only playing a little too loose in the first few positions, you are also probably playing too tight on the button or next to it. This positional advantage can allow you to play far more hands if you know what you are doing. As for bet size, be aware that there are many more hands that can be played for a single pre-flop bet than for a double or triple bet. This is even more true for Omaha than Hold'em. If you are a good player playing against bad players, you can sneak in with quite a few marginal hands if you play them well on later streets, and it is cheap to get in. Again, this is most true in late positions. Here are examples of 4 hands that can only be played if you can come in cheaply and you are in late position.
Key point number 4, gamble more when you can win the whole pot.
In general, in most Omaha games, the best player will also be the tightest player. This is less likely to be so in other poker games, but in Omaha, the fact is most players call too much, especially before the flop and on the flop. And your main edge therefore comes from folding hands others won't. Later on, I'll mention how cautious you should be when your hand is trying to win only half the pot. Few players play as conservatively as they should in this situation. On the other hand, many players don't play loose enough when they have a chance to scoop. In a three-way pot, your profit is 4 times as great if you scoop than if you split. So, if an otherwise marginal hand has a few outs that might win the whole pot, you should almost never throw it away. And if by playing a hand aggressively, you may be able to knock out a player so that you can now win the whole pot or even 3/4 of a pot that you would have otherwise split, then that is what you should do. In this example, you should play your hand, as weak as it appears. The reason is that an 8 will almost certainly scoop the pot for you. Had that 9 been a 10, you would certainly not play.
Omaha High-Low Key Concept 5, know when to go for an overcall.
One of the key decisions in Omaha occurs on the last round of betting, when the player on your right bets and there is another player behind you. If you have a cinch for the whole pot, a raise is almost automatic. But what about other situations? As mentioned in my previous point, you should also raise if there is some chance your raise will win you the whole pot rather than half. This would typically occur when you have the nut high and you think the bettor has a worse high while the third player has a weak low. A raise is also indicated if it may save you half the pot. This play comes up when you have a fair hand in both directions and expect to split the pot with the bettor one way or the other if you can get it head up. Yet another time to raise is when it might gain you 3/4 of the pot instead of only a half or a quarter. This usually occurs when you have the nut low and a weak high. Your raise might knock out a better high. So when do you just call? The answer is when you know you will only win half the pot or maybe a quarter of the pot no matter what you do, and you think a raise will make the third guy fold. It's only one situation, but it comes up a lot. In this first case, you normally should just call. The best you can do is win half the pot, so going for an overcall should gain you at least another half of a bet. In this second case, you should probably raise. The original bettor may have the same low hand as you without as good a high hand. If you can knock out that third player, you may very well turn your hand into one that wins 3/4 rather than 1/4 of the pot.
Key points to beware of in Omaha High-Low 8 or better, according to David, are as follows. Beware of drawing to second best hands for half the pot.
This is probably the single most important concept in Omaha High-Low. Unless the pot is huge, do not consider drawing to a hand that can obviously win only half the pot, except if you were drawing to the nuts. Why? Well, consider this. In a three-way pot, you are laying 2-to-1 odds on every bet if you know half the pot is gone. And it could be much worse if someone has the same draw as you. This situation is almost never worth playing unless you are drawing to the nuts for your half, and it might not even be worth playing even if you are. For instance, one of the reasons a hand like 4, 5, 6, 7, even double suited, should usually not be played is because it so often turns into the kind of hand that we are now speaking about. The only normal exceptions to drawing to the second best half are if the pot is gigantic or you have that draw for both high and low. There are a few other exceptions, but they are so rare and dangerous that I'd just as soon not mention them. In this example, you make the nut low if a 3 comes. However, more often, you are drawing to the second nut low. Furthermore, your chances of making a high are almost nil. Therefore, you should almost always throw this hand away.
Beware of overplaying the nuts.
In Omaha, even the nuts may not be that good a hand, especially with 2 cards to come. For instance, if your hand is King, King, 7, 6, and the flop is 9, 8, 5 with 2 spades, you should probably throw your hand away, even though you have a straight. Any card that comes off except a king hurts your hand. Plus, someone may have you tied already. While this is an extreme case, fairly similar situations come up all the time. Having a tie, of course, is one of the main reasons why the nut low by itself is never that great. It is a hand that should be played very cautiously. However, that nut low is a much better hand if it has high possibilities or if it contains another low card that gives it so-called counterfeit protection. In these cases, you can get a lot more aggressive with it. In the case of the nut high, things are not quite the same as the nut low, since you are more likely to win the whole pot. But you still must be careful in many situations. I mentioned one already. Another example would be when you have, let's say, 2 queens, and the flop comes something like Queen 5-4 with a flush draw. Keep these things in mind.
Beware of deuce 3, laying 2-1 and getting quartered.
I decided to lump 3 simple but important concepts together for this final point. I've touched upon all these ideas already, but they bear repeating. Omaha High-Low is rarely a game of psychology. Whether you like it or not, this game is mainly one of evaluating hand strengths, and the mistake most players make is overvaluing pure low draws and high hands that can't scoop. 3-2 before the flop is a very weak hand unless you have other good things to go with it. If an ace doesn't flop, you will need one to come later and still will probably only get half the pot. When half the pot is gone, you are laying 2-1 on every bet in a 3-way pot. This can occur when you have a low only, are drawing for a low only, or when you are shooting high when there are already 3 low cards on board. When you have a low, things may be even worse than just laying 2-1. If you are tied in a 3-way pot, you will get back $75 for every $100 you put in. This is called getting quartered. You can have a high hand, usually a straight, and be in this same situation. Critical to winning in all high-low split games is to keep focused on what your mission is, to win the whole pot, and be very, very careful when you can't.
Coming up, David's thoughts on bluffing and games with extremely loose play. But first, let's briefly recap key points in Omaha High-Low 8 or better. Play mainly hands where all 4 cards work with each other. Don't automatically play ace-deuce or ace-ace. Always be sure to adjust for position and bet size. Gamble more when you can win the whole pot. Know when to go for an overcall. According to David, things to beware of in Omaha High-Low with an 8 qualifier are: beware of drawing the second best hands for half the pot. Beware of overplaying the nuts. Beware of playing deuce 3, laying 2-1, and getting quartered. Next, David Sklansky's thoughts on bluffing.
We haven't talked much about bluffing. If you're a beginning player, you may find this a little strange, since most people think that bluffing is what poker is all about. More experienced players, of course, know that this is not true. Except for games like no-limit poker, there is usually too much money in the pot compared to the bet size to offer much hope of running a successful bluff. This is doubly true when your opponents are less than experts. However, that doesn't mean that I think bluffing should be abandoned completely. And semi-bluffing, where you bet a weak hand that has decent improvement chances, should be a move you make frequently. However, pure bluffing should be done only on rare occasions. For instance, when your opponents have bad hands or missed draws, but your hand is worse yet. It should also be done every so often, simply so your observant opponents won't realize you never bluff. Against experts, it should be done on an occasional random basis. However, if you're basically a solid player, the less bluffing you do in limit play, especially the lower limits, the more money you'll usually end up with at the end of the session.
In this final point, David's insight into extremely loose games.
Many good players complain to me that they have trouble beating a so-called no-fold-'em hold'em game and other games of that ilk. Now, I know this is partly their imagination. They are used to playing in games where they win a large majority of the time. In wild games, they figure to win less often, maybe even less than half of the time. But their frequent, huge wins ought to more than make up for their other losses. It just doesn't seem that way psychologically. Still, the fact remains that their lack of expected successes in these type of games is not only in their heads. Most good players do not play these games properly. Actually, wild games can be separated into 2 types. One is where players are much too loose and passive. The other is where they are loose but also aggressive. In the second type of game, the proper strategy is to play only very good starting hands and not to play them very aggressively. Do a lot of checking and calling. Do not normally try to slug it out with aggressive players just because your hand is better than theirs on average. Rather, you want to give them a false sense of security. Play like a wimp. You'll win money simply because you will have the best hand so often. Meanwhile, your passive play will encourage them to continue to play badly, as they don't perceive you as a threat. Well, they don't perceive the rake as a threat either, but that rake usually winds up with the most money. So will you if you can swallow your pride and play in a way that is normally wrong and certainly not the way you've achieved your poker success in general. This may not be the most satisfying way to play poker, but it is the best way to get the money. In the case of loose passive games, the idea is to take full advantage of the mathematical precepts involving multi-way pots. Of course, you virtually never bluff or even semi-bluff, but that is obvious. What is less obvious is how you should play big pairs and big unsuited cards. We are speaking of Hold'em here. Since we know that high pairs do better against few opponents, the correct strategy is not to raise with them unless that raise will significantly thin out the field. Better to even check these hands on the flop rather than bet into many opponents, since your check may allow you to check raise. That check may also entice someone else to bet into you on the next round, where a raise on your part will probably be effective in thinning the field. Basically, the right strategy with these one-pair hands that can't improve easily to the nuts could be summarized by the advice, keep the pot small until you have the opportunity to knock players out. On the other side of the coin, many otherwise good players miss opportunities to extract the most they can from these passive multi-way pots. To use Hold'em as an example again, be aware how certain hands become very profitable in games like these. 2 suited big cards, for instance, are far better than the same 2 cards unsuited and are worth 2 or 3 raises before the flop. Smaller suited connectors, ace small suited and even king small suited, should now usually be played, sometimes even for a raise. I can't stress this enough. The same goes for small pocket pairs that would normally be thrown away. 9-7 of hearts can easily turn into a hand that wins you a giant pot. Though you shouldn't get too carried away with this concept, especially in early position, playing these hands will definitely make a difference in the long run. Be aware, however, that this style of play will take a larger bankroll and will occasionally result in a large loss. If you need to win as quickly as possible, you would want to tighten up somewhat, or maybe even avoid the game entirely. Finally, you should understand that in any of these wild games, whether they be loose passive, loose aggressive, Hold'em or stud, you should throw away mediocre, non-drawing hands. Don't even take a card off with them except under the most optimum conditions. That card may just get you in more trouble. Hands like ace-10, king-jack, or even ace-jack are garbage now if they are unsuited. Likewise, a hand like 2 jacks and a 5 in 7-card stud. I don't care if they are the best hand at this point. I don't care that these hands win you money in your regular game. If you start throwing them away in these crazy games, I won't have to listen to your stories anymore.
Face to Face with David Sklansky. Sure, now you know who David is, but do you know who you are? Unless you keep searching deep inside yourself, unless you make that commitment to study, focus, apply, to keep reading and taking notes, to take care of yourself mentally and physically as well as emotionally, until you do what it takes to win in life as well as at the tables, you'll only keep kidding yourself. I always remember this one quote. I think of it often. Winners make themselves winners. Losers make themselves losers. Poker is sheer justice. It's our hope that our session with David will help tip the poker scales in your favor. Until our next face-to-face encounter, thank you for watching. I'm Ben Tracy. See you at the table.
get one bit of information, this much, that helps you win pots over the long haul, then you've made your money back 1,000 times.
The thing that separates the winners from the losers is just a complete total knowledge of how to play poker very, very well.
When you play quality hands, it pays off. When you don't play quality hands, you can lose a lot of money.
You really have to care a lot, and you have to try your hardest every time you sit down at the poker table.
In football, there's no difference between a 30-0 loss and a 30-28 loss. But in poker, there is, because the score continues on to the next day. I'd much rather lose 30-28 than 30-0 in poker.